Welcome to the Citizens Reporter. I'm your host and editor, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. The Citizens Reporter is a weekly cablecast news program coming to you out of the Valley Access Studios in Stillwater. Now, to help me this week with our weekly news is one of my regular citizen reporters, Mr. Mark Bradley. Thank you, Mr. Bradley, for being here.
Thank you for having me. And I'd like to start out with something that is an institution in the Twin Cities for almost 100 years, and that's the Shriners. If you've gone to any of the parades across Minnesota, not just in the Twin Cities, the Shriners are always showing up with their fez tops on. But what's interesting is that they have a hospital, and most of us aren't really that aware of it. I wasn't that aware of it. That's over in Minneapolis. They're going to be phasing out the hospital itself for a clinic that they're opening up in Woodbury now. And so it's going to be a brand new clinic. Mm-hmm. So they've decided that they do not want to continue with the facilities as they have them now. Most of their patients now are out hospital patients. So they don't need to have the facilities they have. So they're actually marketing them and getting them out of their control. And they're going to have this clinic that's just ready to be opened, I believe, in about a month. So we'll be seeing it just shortly there.
Oh, very good.
For Woodbury.
Well, and this is probably consistent with what we've seen in trends in the medical industry as a whole, because we've reported on these programs in the past of various hospitals that have been downsizing or decreasing the number of beds that they have, because the number of patients overall are decreasing as to those patients who need long-term hospital stays. Right. And so more and more of the hospital procedures that are being conducted today are more on a short-term or an outpatient basis. So I guess I'm not surprised to see this, Mr. Bradley.
I have something here that I think is very interesting. And this happens to be, we've been talking about Arden Hills and the coalition. There's a coalition that's alleging sites' affordable housing goals violate the law. And what I find intriguing about it is that it is, and it's not the thing they lead with the coalition, but the point is, when you really read it on it, the coalition is Minneapolis, 40 different public units in Minneapolis coming to Arden Hills.
Right, but
Ramsey County is the one who's doing the property.
So let's back up a little bit for our viewers, because they may have missed the news program a few weeks ago when we reported that Ramsey County is suing Arden Hills. Right. And that the lawsuit has to do with the number of affordable housing units, or AKA voucher housing units, that were going to be in an area where Ramsey County and Arden Hills had a joint agreement for development in the area where the munitions plant used to be. And so we have this dispute going on. And so what this article is about, that is in Thursday, July 11th of the Pioneer Press, is that there is an advocacy coalition in Minneapolis that wants to join in the litigation on the side of Ramsey County, saying that the Arden Hills should not have control over how many affordable housing or voucher housing units that they want to have in their city. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of sums it up here in a nutshell. And I think your point is well taken, Mr. Bradley, in that you're looking at this coalition is a coalition from the Minneapolis area, looking to enter into a Ramsey County dispute. Right. And so the geographic jurisdiction is different between Hennepin County and Ramsey County.
Right. Plus, also, I wanted to make some other observations on it that aren't really being made. First of all, when you talk about the city, that is fighting it. They had an agreement with Ramsey County originally, and Ramsey County wanted to expand it.
This article goes on to say that the city and the county administrators and negotiators haven't met for months to talk about the 427-acre project in the county-owned site that's, as I mentioned before,
Right.
the Army ammunition plant, a former ammunition plant. And this project, of course, is a county project where the county owns the land, and the county has already invested $41 million into this property. Now, in May, and this is about the time that we did our show on this, Ramsey County filed a lawsuit against Arden Hills in an attempt to break their legal partnership over the project, saying that negotiations over the density, funding, and affordable housing had deadlocked. Now, the Arden Hills officials, their side of the coin is that they have said the county has not shared its goals about the project with them in a timely manner, if at all, and they still wish to partner on the project. Now, this particular coalition that wants to enter into this lawsuit on the side of Ramsey County, they are a Minneapolis-based alliance of 32 community organizations that advocate for racial justice, economic justice, environmental justice, and health equity. And it's one of the most, if not the most, aggressive advocates of affordable housing in the Commons Project. And that's the name of this particular project in Arden Hills is called as the Commons Project. So thank you for that update on that news. Well, what's next on the agenda there, Mr. Bradley?
Well, the other thing I had on the agenda was something to do with a certain attorney who was just trying to do her job by advertising herself in the city pages. And we do have those Christian groups that are out there that seem to want to stand out and say, we're going to make everything right by God because of basically we determine what God is going to say. And in this case, they were saying, let's petition the paper and we'll demonstrate against this lawyer because of she's advertising in the city pages, which is owned by the Star Tribune.
Right. Now, this particular article is in the Star Tribune of, let's see, Thursday, July 11th. And this I found to be a rather fascinating story in that it involves an attorney who wants to advertise that they are open for business and that they chose to do their advertising, at least in one place, in city pages. And there is this organization, as Mr. Bradley indicated, that was not in agreement, not necessarily with the attorney herself, but in general with the concept of advertising in the city pages because of the content of the type of advertising in the city pages. And so this organization called the Christian League, what they were doing, that certain members of their organization would send the attorney postcards and emails imploring her not to advertise in the city pages because it ran ads for adult-oriented businesses. And so what this attorney did then in turn is that she went and she obtained a 2-year harassment restraining order and started in April of this year against the league. And the league now is bringing that to court, asking that the restraining order against them be thrown out because what it does is it restrains their freedom of speech. What I get out of this article is that she got a harassment order because she really didn't like getting their communications with her. She just didn't like the communications, not that she felt threatened or that they were threatening to her, because this says that those emails and communications to her from supporters of the Christian League were imploring her to not advertise. It does not say that they were making threats against her, that if she continued to advertise, they were going to come and burn her house down. See, there's quite a difference there. So not knowing exactly what she claimed in her harassment restraining order, not knowing exactly what the claims are of the Christian League, I can see where this might be a very fascinating case, and it's worth keeping an eye on as we follow it through the court system. Next up on the Citizens Reporter, we're going to be turning our spotlight on the city of Maplewood. Now, in the last few news reports, whether or not you've been watching Off the Record News, Local News Report, or right here, the Citizens Reporter, we've been looking at the process and discussions that the Maplewood City Council has been having regarding their tax increment financing districts and expanding the tax increment financing district there in the Gladstone neighborhood. We've also been looking at their big plans for their capital improvement plan for the next 5 years. And as we've been reporting, there's an overlap of some of the financial dollars between the financial presentations of the capital improvement plan and the presentations of the tax increment financing plan. And the overlap of that data and those financials is sometimes murky at best, maybe even doing a little double counting. And whether or not that this council, given that 3 of the 5 members are appointed, will they even have the incentive on behalf of the residents to ask the questions about the overlap, about the double counting of numbers between the capital improvement plan presentation and the tax increment financing presentations? Well, we're going to take up from where we left off, in that we have been, we showed where the Maplewood City Council, they had a workshop on their capital improvement plan. Originally, the presentation was only supposed to be 34 or 35 minutes, but about halfway through, the appointed Mayor Marley Abrams decided that, well, maybe she should grant a little bit more time to the Finance Department to present their CIP plan, considering it is for the whole next 5 years. And so as it turned out, their presentation was for about a total of 55 minutes. Now, in these programs, we have spent about 3 hours analyzing those numbers. Well, guess what, Mr. Bradley? At this last workshop of the 24th, they decided maybe they really do need to spend a little bit more time on their capital improvement plan, that maybe 55 minutes isn't enough. Because, by the way, they forgot to talk about some of the other things and programs that they're putting into that capital improvement plan that they didn't talk about in the first 55 minutes that are really kind of big issues that they got to talk to the council about, and they can't do it in the back room because that would be against the open meeting law if they had all the council meetings somewhere. And then they said, oh, by the way, let us tell you about the other plans that we didn't tell you about that are in that capital improvement plan. So let's take a look at our first clip.
Second meeting here, there's going to be a Planning Commission hearing on July 16th, and we're going to visit with the Park Board in August about the plan, and then the City Council will have a hearing and adopt the plan in December with the budget. Again, just a quick overview. We're talking about a 5-year CIP, about $70 million. 7.9 of which is buildings. We're going to cover that in a little bit more detail because that's primarily the fire hall. And again, most of it being streets at 47 million. So we talked about that extensively last time, so we're just going to talk a little bit more about the fire hall, redevelopment, and parks tonight.
Let's pull that slide back up and take a look at that schedule. Now, as you heard, they added in that's the second meeting because, oh, by the way, we forgot. We forgot to talk about, oh, the project for the fire department. Did you hear the big numbers on that? Oh, by the way, oh yeah, we forgot to tell you about we added redevelopment for the Gladstone neighborhood into the CIP. Yeah, we didn't tell you about that one. And oh, by the way, we've got another thing coming up that, well, we didn't tell you about either, and that is that we need to put the Bruntrip Farm into the CIP. And then we're going to, so you see, we're going to cover all those topics here tonight because those are all the new topics that suddenly, oh, the staff decided, I guess we need to talk to the council about. Now, you heard how they're going to go to the Planning Commission and have the public hearing. But this public hearing, by the way, is before the Parks Board Commission has their workshop meeting. And you heard how she said they're going to visit. They're going to visit with the Parks Commission. Visiting with the Parks Commission implies that you're just going to tell them what you're going to do. You're not actually getting input from them. And it doesn't matter what input they give because the public hearing has already been held the month before. So it's irrelevant. Those two items should be turned around. And then you see where it says that then they're going to have their city council hearing. Well, if they've already had the public hearing at the Planning Commission level, typically the Maplewood City Council does not hold a second hearing because the Planning Commission held the hearing. Therefore, why do we need to have another one? If somebody wanted to speak up, they could have done it at the Planning Commission level. So you see, there's a few things that I would challenge about their schedule there. Mr. Bradley.
Well, when I'm looking at that schedule, what really bothers me about it is, and I'd love to take a look at it one more time here because of the fact is, when I'm looking at it, it says, well, we got one for the park board workshop, and it's a workshop, not anything that's going to be done. We're not going to do anything until December 9th, and everything's going to be done on December 9th. And what we heard just by them at this point is we have three things that were not run in on anything up until now. And one of them happens to be this fire hall. They just got rid of a fire hall.
Well, and see, but that's what the whole point is that they are going to decommission one of our 3 fire stations. They want to do it silently, and they're trying to still pretend whether or not if they're doing a renovation, or are they doing decommissioning, or are they building a brand new one? And we'll get to that clip so you can hear how the heebie-jeebie finances really work.
I want you to watch that because the fact is, what I'm trying to make the point here is that when we heard that thing, they said, here's the things that weren't even part of our planning initially, but we know this is the money that's going to have to go for them. So how can you come up with a budget at all if you don't even address the things that you knew were there from the beginning, from the get-go?
Right, exactly. So let's take a look at our next clip as they get into the issue of the fire department budget.
So this is the primary driver for the $7.9 million proposed budget for the for buildings in the capital improvement plan. So obviously it's the fire station rehabilitation or replacement. Wanted to talk just a little bit about the financing because that's the key thing to take away here. In the plan, we had planned to bond for $1.7 million. We have $2 million in existing reserves. That was from land sales and other revenues. And $3 million was budgeted for potential land sale revenue, and that's a part that is still in flux. There are a couple of parcels of land to be sold with the proceeds going towards new buildings, but those parcels have, I guess there's one that there's been some offers, but nothing has been finalized yet, and the other one has not even been marketed yet. So to keep that in mind, that 3 million has not yet been realized. If something doesn't move, by the time this building gets off the ground, we'll have to be looking at probably debt financing, which will change the parameters that we talked about last time, at least temporarily.
Extensively on these news programs, we have covered the recent analysis of the Maplewood City debt and how proud they are that they finally have turned the corner of some of their debt that they didn't even tell the residents about. The debt that they had to the state of Minnesota, a debt so large that, by the way, the state of Minnesota, when they had money that was due to the city of Maplewood, that they wouldn't pay the city of Maplewood that money because Maplewood's debt with the state of Minnesota was too great. Or the deficit in a number of projects or a number of funds that were held with the state of Minnesota. So you see, on the one hand, at one meeting, Maplewood finance director is talking about how they have recovered from their financial woes, and yet on the other hand, at this presentation, she is talking about how they're going to have to go back into debt again. And we've got this issue about how much of the CIP plan, this fire station, whether or not it is a relocation or a renovation or whatever they're doing, because they don't know what they're doing, it is $7.9 million. And that is over 10% of the $70 million budget for the CIP plan. So you see, this is a significant portion of the CIP, Capital Improvement Plan. This is a significant portion, and yet half of the money that we're talking about, they don't even know where it's coming from. And they're talking about the sale of land is going to go into this fund. And yet, if you listen to the meetings having to do with economic development and what they're doing with regard to buying and selling properties for economic development, they are saying at those meetings that the city properties that they're selling, that the money that they get from selling those properties are going into redevelopment. So you see, they're using this same marker for two different plans. We have property X, we're going to sell it. The proceeds from it, in one presentation says, it's going to go for the fire station rebuild and relocation. In another presentation, it says the proceeds from selling this property are going to go towards redevelopment in the Gladstone neighborhood or someplace else. So you see, they are double counting their chickens.
Well, it's like the Three Stooges, if you really think about it, because they're addressing it as, hey, Mo, guess what? We have a fire station over here, and we're going to close it. But hey, Mo, we're going to have another fire station over here when we build it. But we don't have the money to build it yet. Mo. So let's close the station that we got, because that makes good sense. Because if we don't need that station, if we get the other station, but we don't have the other station because we haven't built it yet and we don't have the money to build it. So whoa, guess what? I don't know. Hey.
Right, what do we do with the fire station loss in the meantime is the point you're making. And that
Right.
leads us to the next clip, which has to do with, of all things, the ladder truck. Now, on these programs over the last few years, one of the actions that we have been reporting on over and over and over again is Maplewood's fire department's use of their ladder truck, not for responding to fires, but for responding to medical calls. And we've had this documented. We've also reported this from the field in following the ladder truck to find that it's gone to a medical call and seeing how it's responded to the medical call. And the point that we have always made on these news programs is that when you use a ladder truck, which is a very expensive piece of equipment, for driving over the road all the time, putting all that extra mileage on it, just so that you can use it for medical calls, which, by the way, you can't put a stretcher on it
Right.
to haul somebody to the hospital. You're just got your little medical kits in the back. That when you're putting that kind of usage on that ladder truck, eventually it's going to have to be replaced sooner than you would expect, because when you have a city like Maplewood that's got buildings that are 3 stories, 4 stories high, you have to have a truck that, if there is a fire in one of those high buildings, that you have the right size truck that can respond to that fire at that height. And so you can't be out without having a ladder truck. Well, let's take a look at our next clip and find out, oh, lo and behold, what do they need to replace now?
The main takeaway there is that we're still a little unclear about the financing plan for the fire department. The only thing that I will talk about in terms of equipment, because most of it is just very minor, is there is a ladder truck coming up. Most of our equipment, we have equipment replacement funds. We really don't have to worry too much about financing for equipment anymore. However, we don't have enough in reserves for a ladder truck that would cost $1.2 million. And eventually, we will have, a fund that will handle that, but at this point, we don't. So what we would probably look at for that is what we call tax-exempt lease financing, and it's through one of the major banks, U.S. Bank or Wells Fargo, and it's basically a lease to purchase. It's really a financing mechanism more than it is a lease.
Another $1.2 million. So that is the end result of their very expensive use of a ladder truck to go on medical calls over the last 5 or 6 years. And I was first alerted to this because my law office was just around the corner from the fire station. And I thought it was unusual that it seemed like the ladder truck was always driving by my window of my law office. And I'm thinking, there can't be that many fires that require a ladder truck in Maplewood. Where is it going? Why is it always out driving around? Why are we doing that? So I hopped in my car one day and I followed that ladder truck, and that's when I discovered that they stopped at an apartment building. They got out with their little medical kits. They went into the apartment. They were on a medical call because the ambulance couldn't get there, or because they were too strapped for personnel, or some other reason of misallocation of resources, that they had to use the ladder truck. So I started keeping track of this, and I think Mr. Bradley even saw this, that they were driving around with their ladder truck. Another time I happened to be driving in another neighborhood and saw the ladder truck off in the distance, so I went and I followed it, and again found it going on a medical call. So it was a very commonplace occurrence, and now here we are, having worn out our ladder truck, and we need to get a new ladder truck for $1.2 million.
I want to make 3 points here. First of all, wasn't it about 10 years ago or 15 years ago they got rid of, we had how many stations at one time? 5 stations?
We had 5, yes.
So we had ambulance service for all 5 of them, if I'm not mistaken, at one point. And as they reduced the amount, they should have had plenty of ambulances. So why we needed to use the ladder truck so much, it kind of astounds me. But if you know, in military, they have something called a deuce and a half, and that's where the military puts the soldiers in the back of a truck that happens to be have a tarp on the back of it, and it's just the soldiers and that's it. You take a look at that truck that's there. That has to a deuce and a half means 2,500 pounds because of it's the weight of the vehicle there. What we're looking there is at least twice to 3 times the weight of a deuce and a half. So on top of everything else you're looking at, you got to spend more in gas to get to there because of with the maximum amount of weight you're running around with, you're using a lot more gas than you would with a smaller unit like a ambulance that was probably uses 15 to 20 miles per gallon. It's probably 4 to 5 miles per gallon on that unit there, if that. On top of that, you're taking a look at, think about if it's that much weight, think what it's doing to our roads on a regular basis. This is a council that basically has gone wild with idiocy. That's why I said that this is like a Laurel and Hardy, Three Stooges operation.
And here's, you brought up the issue about why would they do this? And of course, I have scratched my head trying to think about it as well. Because you're right, we had 5 fire stations. We had ambulances stationed in each of those fire stations, because 80 to 83% of all calls for service in Maplewood to the fire department are for medical calls.
Right.
I mean, that's what we do in the fire department. We serve medical calls. That's the point. And so that's where the resources really need to go. So when these 5 stations then were decommissioned one by one, and so then was only 2, and now we've got 3, but now we're going to be back down to 2 again. What happens in Maplewood, because it is L-shaped, it's not that easy to get from one end of town to the other in the time that's necessary to keep your response times looking good.
Right.
And so if, for instance, coming out of the Gladstone station, you need to get somebody to a call quick, but the ambulance happens to be down in South Maplewood somewhere, the response time from South Maplewood to Gladstone is going to be a lot longer than if you just simply send the ladder truck that is stationed at the Gladstone fire station over to that medical call that's only a mile and a half away. So you see what it does, then they can say, well, we dispatched a unit, and that unit then got there at X time. Nobody asks, well, what kind of unit did you send? They don't ask, oh, did you send the ladder truck? Does that make sense to send a ladder truck? They're only looking at that response time. And so I believe that that's the reasoning that they did this, was because it all had to do with trying to make their response times look different than they actually would have been if they used the proper vehicles for the type of call.
But I still have that question. What happened to all the ambulances? You know, I have all kinds of cars. I have a T-Bird that I still have, that I bought, which was an 06. My son has a Crown Vic that's 05. Well, and those are still running just fabulous. I mean, now I know that a lot of these stations were closed, but during that period of time, we should have had an excess of ambulances, which means that we could have actually stored most of these large vehicles for important calls.
Right, but that, so in our next clip, we're going to move on to the next big thing that wasn't included in the CIP plan presentation the first time around, the big redevelopment of Gladstone. Let's take a look.
A bit about the redevelopment. We do have, as I mentioned last time, we do have a couple of $1 million set aside in the CIP for the Gladstone area, and this would be in the form of tax increment financing. So it will be a bond, but it is calculated in. Just to give you an idea of what actually has been going on with the EDA fund, even though we haven't really been active with the EDA, there's some plans to be more active. There has been, local government aid and tax money that has been flowing into the EDA. A number of parcels of land have been purchased with that money, including 1375 Frost, 1946 English, and 1160 Frost. We've also facilitated the purchase of the Moose Lodge through an interfund loan. So there's been a significant amount of activity, and at this point, I think the Community Development Department is evaluating various options to bring partners in and get some tax increment financing districts started. But we do have $2 million in the 5-year plan for redevelopment. That's just the main takeaway.
We know from our previous reports and looking at prior presentations in the last month that one of those preferred partners that they're looking at is Sherman and Associates, which has a time deadline of next October 2020 to get its tax increment financing plan put together properly if it wants to have it added on to the phase 1 and phase 2 that they already have in the Gladstone area. So that's already been reported. But here's the fascinating thing, Mr. Bradley, listening to the words and what she said. She said that they used the money from the sale of city property to buy property. Well, we know that in the previous slide, they're talking about selling other city properties so that they can put it towards the fire station. But in this particular slide, she said that they bought 1375 Frost.
Right.
We have been reporting on all the Gladstone properties that the city of Maplewood has purchased. And this is news to us, that the city of Maplewood purchased 1375 Frost. That happens to be the property that is known as the Gladstone House, which has sat vacant since probably 2005 or 6, somewhere around there. And at one time, it was a furniture store, and before that, it was a location for a catering service. So anybody who's familiar with that area of Gladstone on Frost knows where the Gladstone House is. The city has always talked about buying it, but apparently they have done so. It also says, she said, that they bought 1946 English. Now we know that, we've reported on that, that is the Moose Lodge. She said that they purchased it. And then she says that they bought 1160 Frost. That's that piece of property that we've also reported on that is a little further west on Frost, over by the boat company, across from Gloucester Park, and next to the Savannah and the boat company. So there is a parcel there that that they overpaid from the market value of it quite substantially. But what was fascinating in what she said next, because she clearly said that they bought 1946 English, and that is the Moose Lodge. Then in her next statement, she says that they facilitated the purchase of the Moose Lodge. Now she identifies it as if it is a separate property, that they facilitated the purchase of the Moose Lodge through an intra-fund loan. So there must be a reason why she is treating this differently in the second sentence, in that she's trying to cover her tracks somehow. And that now maybe they didn't just buy it, they just facilitated it. You see, they're
Right.
trying to craft the message to protect themselves because in essence, what they did is that they took that $2 million out of the sanitary sewer fund, which is meant to help pay for road reconstruction projects. They took that money and now they're using that for land speculation. And we have played that audio of the meeting where they decided to do that.
I'm confused because I remember us doing the shows back when we were talking about the Gladstone House, and the one thing I do remember was that it was in arrears on paying its taxes.
Yes, but the city, that doesn't matter to the city.
Well,
Because the city is a governmental entity and that's irrelevant.
well, I guess if they were far enough back in taxes, couldn't the city actually claim the building? That's my question.
Well, that's a good question. People oftentimes wonder how tax forfeit property works. And you see the governmental entity that's in charge of the tax forfeit property is actually the county, Ramsey County. And so under the statute, it's my understanding that Ramsey County can offer it first to the municipality any tax forfeit property if they want to buy it first. So they get actually first dibs on tax forfeit property, and then when they pass on it, then it is put up, the Ramsey County then puts it up for public auction to purchase. So we don't know if this was purchased by the city from the county out of tax forfeiture, or if it was purchased from the property owner, and that's something we'll have to do at Data Practices Act to find out the answer.
And that's why I feel like Alice in Wonderland. It's curiouser and curiouser. I want to know what the prices were paid, because they said these properties, so some money had to exchange hands. So my question is, how much are we really looking at here? Because if it totally wipes out the $2 million on any one of these funds, it means there's no funds there. And what they're talking about what they're going to do for improvements here or for the station that's there are all gone.
Well, and here's another issue, Mr. Bradley, that you have triggered a thought in my mind. Let's say that the city of Maplewood did buy the Gladstone House out of tax forfeiture from Ramsey County. What if, as a governmental entity, they entered into an agreement with Ramsey County, another governmental entity, and said, well, we don't really have specifically the cash to give you, but we do have something that you would like that will benefit you in the Gladstone community, that benefits your BRT, your bus rapid transit.
Yes.
And we will agree to do a swap so that we get this and you get that. Now, we're not saying they did that, but because we're talking about two governmental entities, they have the ability to do that. And so what if they did? But you see, this is something to be investigated.
Right.
This is something that will lead to another report, which we will get on.
And at this point, I just feel like we're the rabbit going into the rabbit hole.
Yes. Well, now let's continue with the last item that they need to make sure that they add on to that capital improvement plan for full disclosure. Now, keep in mind, this idea of full disclosure, who is it for whose benefit? For the residents of Maplewood? Hardly, because they don't get to comment on any of this and they don't know what any of this is that people are even talking about. Is it for the benefit of the appointed council members who have just only been there for a few months and they don't know what's going on? Or is it really for the benefit of the finance director so that in case the city gets in hot water somewhere along the way, that she is not going to be in hot water because she did her job to make sure it was disclosed to the public the best she could do? So let's see in our next clip who's in on knowing the other project that was left off of the CIP.
That I wanted to add, because really this document is a It's in process right now. And something came up in a meeting that I had with Bob Jensen and City Manager Coleman. Bob Jensen is with the Maplewood Historical Society, and he wanted to meet with Melinda and I about the farm, the Bruin Troop Farm. And one of the things that I questioned was that we don't have anything currently in the CIP for the farm. And we do have some obligations for the farm. And I know that when I came onto the council, we hadn't made sufficient plans for the community center, and we have now resolved that. I think what we need to do, maybe on a much, much smaller scale, is I'd like to see the Bruin Troop Farm included in our CIP.
So that is appointed Mayor Marley Abrams. First off, she is an attorney. She knows that there is a 99-year lease for the Maplewood Historical Society to be located at the Bruin Troop Farm. She knows that it is very easy to just take out the document and read it with regard to who is responsible for what. Who's responsible for the building maintenance, for repairs, for mowing the grass, for all of that. Because you see, the Maplewood Historical Society, from my recollection of having read that agreement, which I have in my archives, I believe that their rent is under $10 a year. And that in exchange for basically having no rent, for being able to locate there, it is their responsibility to maintain the buildings, to mow the grass, to take care of the parking lot, to build any extra accessory buildings that they're going to be building. They have to have city approval, but all of that is on their shoulders. And so here we have Marley Abrams, the appointed mayor. By the way, Maplewood is a Plan B city, and she doesn't have the authority under a Plan B city to be meeting with the city manager, with entities, and making decisions and negotiating on behalf of the city. Under our plan of government, she doesn't actually have that authority to do that. I was the mayor of Maplewood, and I can tell you that's the way it operates. The mayor doesn't have that kind of authority. And so she's actually acting outside of the scope of her duties under the law. But here she is negotiating some new amendment to that lease agreement, because more than likely the Historical Society has found that now, after so many years, they've got a leaky roof, or that there's some other maintenance issue that's a little larger than their coffers plan to take care of. And so there's been this conflict already between the Maplewood Historical Society and the city of Maplewood, working, using the research efforts of the Maplewood Historical Society for free, that now it is my guess that they're looking to change that agreement to say that let's move all those capital costs over to the city when the city never had those obligations to start with. The bargain of the deal was the association, the Maplewood Historical Society, got to be there at no cost in exchange for taking care of everything. So, Mr. Bradley, that's what I think is up. I think they're working on doing an amendment to that lease to move all those capital expenditures over to the city of Maplewood for the benefit of a nonprofit organization. Again, just like they did at the community center, you heard her mention it, it's the same model, but at a smaller scale.
Yep.
That's what she said. We're going to do all these capital improvements for a benefit of a selected nonprofit so they don't have to have those expenses themselves. We, the government, will take it on for them, the taxpayers.
the ultimate paper shufflers,
Yes.
it seems like. And when you take a look at it, isn't that what we're looking at right now? This seems to be, like I said, so much down the rabbit hole because we're talking about a fire station that's going to disappear, a fire station that's supposed to be built, but we don't have the money for, and we don't know where the money's coming from, and we don't even have a plan for it. But it's supposed to replace the one we were already closing in a couple more months.
Right, and now taking on the capital improvement expenditures that were supposed to be taken care of by the tenants who stay at the property for free. Let's go on to our next clip talking about the Bruntrup Farm.
Said, our exact involvement, I know City Manager Coleman has asked Ron Beatty to take a look at what is the city responsible for and what is the Historical Society responsible for, because they have a 99-year lease to run the farm, but I think it would be very beneficial for us if we knew what are our obligations, and then we actually include something in our CIP so that we can actually plan for that, we can budget for it. And Ron has got, I think, a pretty good handle on what it is that the city is responsible for, and also what the Historical Society is responsible for. But I think it's something that we want to address. I think it would be prudent for us to do that. So once we get something more from Mr. Beatty, City Manager Coleman, do you want to kind of explain that so that then we can include something in the CIP?
How many times did she say that she wants to have it included in the CIP? How many times did she say that? It sounds like a campaign promise. At least 4 times she said this, and yet she, as an attorney, knows that that document, which I recall is only about 11 or 12 pages long. If they've lost their copy, I have one in my archives. I'd be happy to make a copy for them, and we can read it here on the program, but I'm pretty certain that it says that the Maplewood Historical Society, by living there, or by occupying the farm for pretty much free, that they're responsible for the maintenance. Let's take a look at our next slide. And, you know, I am really very fascinated that Marley Abrams, an attorney, can't just take out the document and read it herself to see what the city's requirements are. But let's take a look at where we go from here.
Mayor has described, I'm working with Ron to look at that lease agreement that was signed. There were a couple of them, but the latest one was in 2009. And we want to make sure that we communicate both to our staff as to how to plan for any improvements that will be needed there, but also communicate to the Historical Society what their responsibilities are and what ours are. And we're still trying to sort through that a little bit. But I would suggest that we start maybe small and at least start putting something in there and see what that looks like. But we'll know more within a few days, I think, about legally where we're at. But I think we want to just have our eyes open to the fact that we need to start planning for that.
Okay, Madam Mayor, Council, absolutely. I agree. We do have a process for that, and as soon as we hear further what the status is of the farm, Steve, would you like to talk a little bit?
Now this muddies the water a little bit more because now the city manager, Melinda Coleman, references 2009. That, I believe, is when there was an amendment or something to that effect that was entered into, because at that time, the Maplewood Historical Society needed to have another additional building built on the premises to help accommodate the various functions that were going on at the farm so that they would have less stress and wear and tear on the actual original house itself. And so that was at that time that there was a discussion about how that building was going to be built, who had control of the building, and the details about that. But I do not believe that the document at that time affected the main basis of the original agreement, which had been signed prior to 2005. So let's continue with our next clip.
Is maybe once we hear back what portions of it is our responsibility, is kind of do what we've done with our other facilities, is have it reviewed to to see what condition things are in, get an estimate so that that's the plan that we use to develop the CIP. So maybe the first step this year is actually having an inspection of the facilities and developing that plan.
Okay, I would liken that to our asset management plan and including that in that.
It's
and
absolutely that. Yes.
And keeping track of all the facilities and that kind of thing, just like we do with all of our other property and buildings and equipment.
Now, boy, now we're going to turn this into a big inspection of the whole facilities. Maplewood does their own health department inspections of serving and cooking facilities, like restaurants and places that do the cooking of food or the serving of food, which is done at the Bruntrip Farm. Are they going to haul in their inspector for doing those kinds of health inspections to determine whether or not those kitchens are up to snuff under the Minnesota Department of Health standards for catering and for commercial kitchens? How is that going to affect this whole scenario for both the city of Maplewood and for the Maplewood Historical Society? Those are some unintended consequences that I don't think some of these people have really thought through as they're trying to chase the dollars to try to get the city of Maplewood to be responsible for more of the capital improvement repairs that may be the responsibility of the Historical Society. So we may find other fallout as a result of the city going in there and then now doing inspections.
I guess I'm a little confused because of, at this point, I would like to know what the true value of Bruntrip Farm is. I'm trying to address what is its purpose right now. It's not educating the kids. It's not doing anything as far as that goes. We do have park services all over the place that are taking out to wetlands and stuff. There's a lot of investment here. And how's that compared to abandoning a fire station that we just put a whole bunch of money into?
Right.
We seem to waste a lot of money with no real long-term plan to it. Mm-hmm. And that's my question here.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a look at our next clip.
Important for us to do that. The farm certainly is an asset that belongs to the city, and we want to make sure that we financially can, contemplate that so that we have a sustainable plan, and that way we can keep things up at the farm the way that they need to be. So, thank you for that. Any other questions or comments from the council? Okay, thank you very much for your report.
Appointed Mayor Marley Abrams makes it sound like the Bruntrip Farm is an extension of the city of Maplewood. It is not. The property itself is a neighborhood preserve that was purchased with referendum money of the residents, and it is a neighborhood preserve that is an open area for the benefit of the Maplewood residents. The Bruntrip Farm buildings that are there are not original to that property. They were actually moved there from the original Bruntrip Farm, which was located where the Michael's Craft Store is today off of White Bear Avenue. So those buildings were moved there. And the Historical Society, the Maplewood Historical Society, they are the ones who are responsible for all the events there, for all the activities, for making the farm what it is today. They are not employed by the city of Maplewood. They are not an extension of the city of Maplewood. They are an independent, separate organization, just like any other historical society, who has members and volunteers, and they are not affiliated with or a department of the city of Maplewood. And yet, appointed Mayor Marley Abrams has the city taking credit for what the Bruntrip Farm is today. The city of Maplewood did not create the Bruntrip Farm as it is today. It is the Historical Society who did, who still has a very long time left on their lease. Well, it turns out we are at the end of our news program. I want to thank you, Mr. Bradley, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And viewers, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.